Welcome to another episode of Conversations. We have again my friends and fellow panelists Norman Hamilton and John Phillips. We're very lucky to have with us tonight two guests, Dr. Alexis Missick, who's a general practitioner, and Dominic Durham, who's a quantity surveyor. And we'd like to welcome them, thank them for coming tonight, and we hope we're going to have a good conversation. And what we thought we would like to do is actually explore their periods in their lives where they decided to go off to another country for tertiary education, what their experience was like in that country, and what it was like now that they've settled back relatively recently back into the Turks and Caicos Islands. Maybe Dominic might like to start and give us a little bio of his life, early life.
Great, thanks Dr. Manzi. First off, it's a pleasure being a part of this panel. Thank you for having me. My name is Dominic Durham, as you've mentioned. I grew up on the island of South Caicos to the parents of Mary and James Durham. I went to primary school at the Irish Stubbs, and well, because my mom was a police officer and normally transferred across most of the islands, I had the pleasure of attending few primary schools, which was North Caicos and also Providenciales, where I spent my last year of primary school there. I then went to British West Indies Collegiate, where I did my IGCSEs, graduated from there, did my 2 years of A-levels, and then moved to the UK. I went off to study quantity surveying, obviously. I did my bachelor's degree at University of Greenwich, completed that, and went on to do my master's degree at the University of South Bank. I stayed over in the UK and did my work experience as well. Spent 8 years over there, did my chartership. I'm a member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and quite recently returned to Turks and Caicos 2 years ago and commenced employment 3 days before Hurricane Irma.
Very timely.
Very timely.
So what about our other guest, Alexis?
So I'm Dr. Missick or Alexis. Thanks again for having us both and myself on the show. I grew up in Providenciales, so I was born in Fort Lauderdale, moved here at the age of 3 and went to Azita Jolly Primary School, and then went to British West Indies Collegiate. Well, actually I spent 3 days at Clement Howell before going to Collegiate for high school, where I did secondary education and the 2 years of A-level program. From there I went to the UK and I started off doing medical engineering because I wasn't convinced at the time I actually wanted to be a doctor. Needless to say, I ended up there in terms of being a doctor, obviously. But I started off doing medical engineering. I did that for a year because I didn't like the way the course was going, and thanks to yourself, I actually changed to do medical science as a bachelor's degree, I think 2 weeks before the course started. Completed my 3 years, but it was during my second year.
Did you change location at that time?
Yep, so
From
I
where to
changed
where?
From Bath University and ended up in Leeds.
That's right.
It was during my second year that I did a mission trip to Kenya, worked at an orphanage for 2 weeks, a mission hospital for a week, and a primary school for a further 2 weeks. Spending time at that mission hospital, I guess, made a decision to go down into medicine, because I found that the doctors there, before all of their surgeries, once they anesthetized the patients, everyone in the theater would just stop and they said a prayer. To me, it was like I could have faith in science. So I went back to England, applied, and then did 4 years at Warwick. Went on to do general practice, foundation training for 2 years, general practice for 3 in Birmingham. And in 2016, I sort of finished training in England, completed my what we call the MRCGP, which is being a member of the Royal College of General Practitioners. I sort of worked between England and the British Virgin Islands between 2016 and 2018, mostly in the private sector, and returned home last October. So I've been home now for a year, working in general practice.
That is quite a lengthy career path, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
How long were you actually from after A-levels, from when you first went to the UK to do biomedical engineering, and coming back with your qualification. That was
But if I can interrupt,
Yeah, sure.
you and her may be the only two people on this panel who knows what
Right.
biomedical engineering is.
when she applied, she didn't know, which is why she
I
gave
just
it
thought
up.
it sounds very interesting. It, essentially, sort of making devices, medical devices.
Ah, okay.
But I found that the course went more down into the engineering route, how to design devices, the materials used, rather than going towards the medical side as to how you use these different pieces of equipment. So I guess in the back of my head, medicine was still coming out. But yeah, it took me to completing MRCGP, which is essentially general practice training. It took 13 years, because then I spent 2 years in the BVI before coming home.
That's been a pattern with some people when they go away. It's actually very difficult to get into medical school, and the qualifications nowadays are 3 A levels usually, and it's very competitive. And a lot of people over the years historically have actually gone off and they want to become a doctor, but they end up doing a degree first. And you're allowed in about 3 or 4 medical schools in the United Kingdom. You're allowed to do a 4-year course, which is a very concentrated course, which normally takes 5 years if you've had a previous qualification in a degree course, and if you've done some A-level sciences. So so you shortened it by 1 year, but I'm sure it made Warwick a bit tougher, didn't it?
Not really. I mean, in terms of training in England, so yes, I did it, I would say, the long way around, where I did an undergrad first and then med school. But actually, had I gone to the US, then that's the way the programs run. You would do an undergrad first, or in the States they call it pre-med, and their undergrads are usually 4 years.
Right.
And then you'd go on to the medical school, which would be a 4-year graduate course. So comparing it to the US system, I saved myself a year. But doing it sort of the traditional UK, then I actually spent an additional 2 years.
Right. And Dominic, you went to a very interesting place, and tell me about Greenwich,
Yeah.
where you ended up first. What was that transition like from Turks and Caicos to Greenwich? And where is Greenwich? Tell us a little bit about Greenwich.
Yeah, so I left here in Turks and Caicos in 2009 and went to University of Greenwich. I stayed on campus. Greenwich is southeast London. It was a complete shocker for me. When I got there, I spent one night and I actually cried.
What time of year would that have been? Like late autumn, September?
Yeah, late autumn. So it's just getting ready for winter, basically. That's absolutely cool for us coming from the Turks and Caicos. So it was a big transition for me in terms of obviously weather, food, culture. It was a big shock for me. It took long to adapt. I did. The area is pretty quiet. It's calm and relaxed. It's not as diverse as inner London, sort of outer skirts, southeast, sort of borderline Kent area. But it was good. It was a great experience for me.
What was the process of actually at the university? Did they have people that helped you settle in and orientated you, or did you have any friends or family over in Greenwich?
No, absolutely. I didn't have any friends or family at the time. I think there was one other local student that attended the university, which was Royal Robinson Jr. He attended Greenwich at the time as well. So I knew him and we got along quite well.
So you could both sort of cry together on the first night?
Yeah.
What made you what made you pick that school as opposed to any other?
Actually, the schools that I applied to, I didn't get in. And this school, Greenwich, was on the clearing list. And I actually picked up the phone and was phoning universities on the clearing list. And Greenwich was one of the first ones that I phoned. They were in London, that's where I wanted to be. And they accepted me. They were quite pleased with the grades, and they offered a good course in quantity surveying there. After reviewing the modules and everything, I thought it was okay. And the ranking of that university as well wasn't so far off from the ones that I originally applied to.
And you switched at one point from there, and then you went into another teaching area. Was that at the same university?
No. What I did, I completed my bachelor's at University of Greenwich. Graduated with a first class honors. Then I went on to do my master's degree. And I did that part-time because I wanted to work as well to get the experience. So during that time, the construction industry wasn't doing too well in London. I can remember going on interview after interview, probably 6 or 7 interviews before I landed my first job. Some of them, you walk into an interview, you didn't feel as if you've done quite well, and you're walking, there's snow falling on your head, the weather's crap, everything seems to be down. It's just so heavily emotional. And, so I kept going until, I found a job. I got an offer that was with Bouygues, which is a French main contractor company. It's one of top 10 largest contracting companies in Europe, which was a great experience for me. And they just dropped me into the frying pan. I didn't know where to start. But it was a great experience. It really molded me into the profession.
Good.
And
when
so
you went for interview, did you have your dreads in those days?
yes, they were quite short actually. and I actually started to think, should I cut my dreads or what is it?
Good for you.
A little local boy can't land a job, but I kept pushing. Excellent. And I think that, so I then went to do my master's at South Bank University, and it was in quantity surveying, but specialized in contract law, construction contract. So my thesis was on conflict avoidance.
Right.
At that time, the industry as well was, there were loads of disputes. So I basically researched and tried to figure out what was it. Are the contracts not being administered properly? Do
There's
people...
disputes in the building trade, is it?
Yeah, in the building trade.
It's almost normal, isn't it, to have a dispute about the final check?
Yeah. And most of them are about money. So my thesis was around, conflict avoidance. And
Well, you mentioned money, and in Greenwich and also on the South Bank, which is South Bank of the Thames in London, it seems to be a lot more expensive in London area than it might be in other areas, which is why people choose maybe to go to Manchester. You went to Leeds, and it's significantly less expensive. And how did you deal with the expense of doing a tertiary education and doing not just your bachelor's but your master's? How did you fund that?
Yes, to answer your question, it's quite expensive in London. And I think at the time of going over there, I was not aware of the difference in terms of whether I study up north or whether I study in London. So I think that's an important thing that we should be advising students before they go off to choose the area that you study wisely, because there's a difference in terms of expenses and how expensive it is. My education was privately funded. That was funded through HAB, Paul Slattery. I actually did my intern there and worked during summers with him, and they've offered to fund me to go and study and do my bachelor's. And I've done quite well.
You've done very well.
Yeah, I achieved a first class, and I was on my way to come back home. So I can remember telling Paul that I've completed now. I'm on my way back home, and he said, "No, stay and do your master's." And I said, "Well, how?" He said, "You don't worry about that. Just stay and do your master's." So I'm forever grateful to HAB and Paul Slattery. They funded me privately. So yeah, that's how.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Did you ever run out of money? I remember being as a student, hating to ask my parents as I got into my early 20s for a cash top-up.
Yeah, numerous times I ran out of money. I can remember borrowing a cup of noodles from my neighbor just to last me the night until my parents sent some money for me. Right. It's extremely expensive. I didn't think my parents grasped the exchange rate. So when they were sending $300, they think that's $300, when at the time that was about 120 pounds, 150 pounds. And that had to last for the month. So as you would have imagined, But I guess what I learned from it all is how to manage my money. And it is within my profession as well to manage people's money. So it really helped me along the way.
And can I ask you, Alexis, how you finance your rather lengthy tertiary education?
So mine was government funded. I had a scholarship for both degrees. The first year I'd probably say well, first degree was equally as expensive as the second, just because for my medical degree, at that point, because we then could apply for UK passports, I was considered.
So the rules
resident.
changed, didn't they, during your...
Literally the year I got accepted.
Good.
And I had my passport by the time I got to work, so they changed my status from international to resident, which
That made a big difference on the
£11,000
tuition fees.
Yeah,
Huge,
tuition. And as well, the clinical years, which would have been sort of the last 2.5, being classed as a resident, I could actually then apply for a bursary in England, which I did, and would then write back to government and say, well, okay, instead of having to pay my tuition, you can use that same money and fund my electives, because I ended up doing two different elective placements. So my first elective, I spent 3 weeks in Australia and 3 weeks in India. And then for the third year, again, because I didn't have to pay my tuition, I got them to fund a 6-week placement in Vancouver instead of paying tuition. So I didn't really feel the
You seem to have developed a talent rather like Dominic of managing your money or somebody else's funds.
You didn't have to borrow it, so the art of managing my money, but also showing, I guess, what's the word I want to use, negotiating with governments at the time, or the Ministry of Education at the time, how the money could be used in valuable ways rather than just be kept in the purse. And being honest as well, because I could have just said to the university, well, give me that check, but actually I was upfront with government to say, well, I've gotten a bursary, because I can remember the year that IKE happened, the government was late paying tuition, but thankfully the bursary came in time, so when they did...
Use that first.
Yeah, use it first and then ask them to give it to me to use it for my elective. Yeah, but I know the challenges that other students have had as well, where government haven't paid tuition on time, because I can remember in Leeds, I think my second year, it got to November and the university sort of wrote to say, well, your sponsors haven't paid. You have by the end of the month to pay for tuition, or you're going to be sitting out the year, and having to phone home to family who, thankfully, I guess in my case, had contact with persons in government, but not every student has that luxury to say, well, my mom is friends with this person who has that person contact to.
Do you know of students of that era who had to sit out for a year and that might not have been able to?
No, because I think parents would have, I know of students who government were late or they didn't get scholarships, and parents basically got loans from the bank.
Right.
Yeah. So not everyone has been fortunate or unfortunate enough to have contacts to say, well, actually the school is behind my daughter or my son. Can you see to it that payments made?
One thing to realise is when you did actually get your qualifying exams, finally, and you can tell us a little story about that in a moment, but for the 2 years as an intern or houseman, and they call it the foundation years, you actually get paid.
Yeah.
And then for the 3 years which were mandatory to get your professional qualification as a general practitioner, that was paid as well. And you worked within the National Health Service in different departments, getting different skills.
Yeah.
So the last 5 years you were actually earning as well.
Exactly.
Probably not a lot of money,
No,
but
still
enough to live on and have a car and...
So at that point, I sort of wasn't on the government. They basically, as soon as I graduated from med school, they stopped paying anything, which was fine because, as you said, for foundation programs and for general practice training or any training, even though you're providing a service, you are actually being paid.
Well, were you a national scholar?
Yes, I
Were you
was
in-
in 2000.
Okay, right. So your scholarship was funded with no responsibility for you.
Well, no, you still have to have guarantors. even
No,
as-
no responsibility for you to come back and.
You still
and-
did, yeah.
Really?
So
Okay.
at that point, you still had to essentially write to say you were done and give them notice, and they had to find a job, etc. Yeah.
Dominic told us a little bit about his experience of arriving in Greenwich. You
Yeah.
picked Leeds, and I
I
think,
picked Bath actually for the first year.
but you managed to escape Leeds without an Northern accent, which was good.
Yeah.
But how did it feel going to a place like Leeds
Or Bath first.
or Bath? Or
Well, your first arrival was when you went to the...
Bath was beautiful, if you've ever been. Did you get
It's
there?
about in the southwest of England, southwest of
Yeah,
London,
so
isn't it?
Southwest, just the brickwork is a lot different. And I sort of, the university was on a hill, like Dominic, the first year I stayed on campus, which is cheaper. But it also meant I felt the brunt of winter.
Can we just have a little break there and hear Winter's Tale in Bath in a moment? Okay?
Why not?
Thank you. Welcome back from our short break, and back to Alexis to tell us a little bit more about introduction to Bath in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, so Bath was beautiful. Unlike the rest of England with the sort of gloomy red brickwork, it had this sort of nice yellow stone wash brickwork that all of the houses buildings use. So that just added to the beauty, and I guess to an extent helped to reduce some of the homesick. But I guess as well, unlike yourself, I actually went to England with a group of, I think it was about 7 of us, all across the UK. So someone in Wales, Leicester, Manchester, Buckingham, and we sort of every month just took the train and visited someone. So that again helped to reduce the homesick that you had. I fell in love with chocolate cake and just gained loads of weight. But yeah, Bath is gorgeous.
Okay.
Good. Now, you guys, did any of you apply for or receive your education through government sponsored scholarships?
I did for med school.
For med
I had
school.
to apply just the first.
What was that experience like, applying for a government scholarship from the time you made the application to the time the scholarship was awarded?
My memory's awful. I think it was okay. The hardest thing was trying to get feedback from government. That was always difficult. And I often found myself, whenever I was home during summer break or Christmas break, taking a trip to Grand Turk and sitting in the office and waiting for the secretariat or the minister to be there just to have a word, because you would always call and no one would answer the phone. And if they did, the person that you needed to speak to, whether from finance or secretary, whoever was never in office, no one really responded to emails or letters. So I often found myself having to dedicate a couple of days to travel to Grand Turk
Just to follow up. So
just to follow up.
yeah. So you found that the process was not streamlined.
Not as streamlined as it could be.
Yeah.
I think they're not very proactive.
I would say for the most part, no, but funnily enough, I can recall sort of a year after finishing med school, them writing to me and asking me what's happened, why am I not home, what am I doing? And I strongly replied back that I had emailed after completing med school to update everyone, and the only 2 persons who replied to me was the previous sort of PS who was no longer in education, and actually at that time my aunt, who again was in a different department, but no one who was in the Ministry of Education even acknowledged the email. So yeah, they're not the most proactive. But that year they seemed to be real hot on it, because they were emailing loads of students to find out what they were doing, why were they not home, how much longer they're going to be overseas.
And I know you mentioned earlier that there were times when the funds were late reaching the university. Was that typical, or once the scholarship was awarded, it was basically clear sailing in terms of making sure that you got the payments went to the university, or whatever payments were to come to you for your stipend,
Yeah.
your living stipend, those things were
Honestly,
done
not
effectively?
really.
No?
No, because there were often times, again, you try and follow up and you're waiting for your stipend to come, to hit your bank account, or you're asking a family member, can they find out from someone when the late payments are due to come, so you can either reach out to a family member or try and plan accordingly with what savings you did have left.
So even when you had a scholarship, there were some challenges in terms of getting the funds in a timely fashion. Okay. Now, Dominique, I understand that your education is privately funded through the good graces of HAB Limited. But did you even apply for a scholarship when you completed high school?
Yes, yes, I did apply for a scholarship, and I didn't receive one. I think, well, at that time in 2009, that's when they had the interim administration, and I think they have cut scholarship funds as well. So I didn't rely entirely on that application being successful, and so as you've mentioned, to the good grace of Mr. Slattery from HAB, he saw the potential in me and my work ethic during my intern there, and he'd offered to sponsor my scholarship privately. And not only my bachelor's, both bachelor's and my master's degree.
I'm sure you get a chance to talk to some younger people and share your experiences from high school and trying to make that transition into university and beyond. What do you say to them about, if you're in high school today and you have plans on going to university, what do you say to them in terms of what opportunities might be available to them and what they should do to make sure that they get there?
Right. It's a great question, actually, because I actually think that one of the problems that do exist is that most students are not aware of what is out there in terms of careers for them to study. Even myself, when I decided that I wanted to do quantity surveying, no one in my class knew what quantity surveying was. And I think that's a problem that exists today. I think we have, the mentality or the norm that, it's either a lawyer or a doctor or a pilot or an accountant, the normal, but they're not aware of the wide range of professions that are out there. And I think schools need to tap into that shortfall and start to educate and advise the students on, what other careers out there. Even within the construction industry, I was appalled by the different positions that were there. There was someone for everything. There's the logistics manager, there's the site supervisor, there's the estimator, there's a quantity surveyor, the project manager, the architect, the civil, the structural, and it goes on. And there's all of these people that forms a part of a team that ensures that the project comes together well. And it's not only relevant to the construction industry, there's loads of other careers that are out there. So my advice to them would be, have a look and see what's out there. There's tons of other careers. What interests them as well. You need to do something that you're interested in. Yeah.
Since you just a second, John, because I think it's what you raise is very important, and it goes back to a brief discussion we had off camera, which I think it's now incumbent upon persons like you, right, who can now see those opportunities to make sure you find a way to get back to your high school and high schools around the country and talk to young people about the opportunities and the career opportunities that they may not be able to see themselves, to see right now. All right, so don't just wait for them to find out. Try and reach out and
actually, I'm quite active in that already. I did a career talk at British Collegiate some weeks back, and I'm also going to be the first guest on a newly launched talk show, career talk show, that's airing next week. It's on RTC. It's called the Career Ladder, and I'm going to be, offering advice to students on, how did I get into my profession and career, and what steps to take, and that sort of thing. So I'm quite active in, that shortfall.
It's what we call payback.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Would it help? Where would you get the help, or where would you perceive the help coming from? Because it's an area that's interested me for some time. And I always feel there's a lack of communication, a lack of cooperation between the educators and the industries. From what you've said, you both said you had certain difficulties dealing with the government body in terms of scholarship and being kept aware, but you also raise the gap. Nobody is actually telling the students where to go, how to go about it, how to ease that path. Should it come within the education department, or should it come from a financial source in government? And my feeling is it should be coming from the education.
Luckily for myself, when I was en route to study abroad, I attended British West Indies Collegiate, and I think they've done quite well with preparing us for the wider world and the university atmosphere itself. I can remember we used to have sessions on, how to apply, where to go, what to study, and they also showed us how to go on The Guardian at the time. And for example, you choose your career and you look at all of the universities that are top ranking within your career choice and what other careers there are. And we used to have sessions on, what to study and how to apply. So the education sector itself, to answer your question, I think that's where it starts. Luckily for me, a collegiate has done that. And
I think in some ways you were both fortunate.
Yeah.
And I worry more about the public schools, and there's just a lack of that transition.
Well, I think it's there in the
Yeah,
it's
I
there in the
think it
public
is.
schools. The same thing is there in the public schools as well.
They do have.
And that's why I think they have the career days where they invite professionals on.
But that wasn't what I was asking. The difficulty or the challenge for a student, they have their career days, but the challenges of how do you go about it, where do you go, where should you be looking at, where is the best education available for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think most of them
that
they have
transition-
career counselors as well
Yeah.
that
Well,
provide that services. in
How
those schools.
do you interface the scholarship to the school? Because there seems always to be that gap.
Well, the Ministry of Education, they have a list of what they call priority careers that they fund, and then they have a list of that are matched with a list of universities that they fund scholarships to around the world. The majority of them being in the UK.
Yeah.
So I don't think, I'm not sure we're in a position in this country where we can always do better, but I think the groundwork exists in the schools now. How effective it is, I
Where I
couldn't
was
say.
trying to head to was Kira's comment on the amount of time she had to spend pushing trips to Grand Turk, etc. And from Dominic's explanation, I don't feel that there's a close enough interface that actually guides the student that next step forward
There isn't.
and assists through.
I mean,
Career days are one thing.
I see.
Or maybe on RTC with the new programme, that's a good initiative, and you'll spread that message.
Yes, that's
And
the
let's increase the focus there.
that's the intent of the show itself. And
That's a good plan.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about, you've gotten your degrees. Some of you have spent some time working in the UK.
Alexis has
trying
spent
to-
5 years postgraduate
Right.
qualification experience.
And then you decide, okay, it's time now for me to go back home. Talk to us about what that transition has been like for you personally.
okay, deciding to stay in the UK and work prior to coming home was the best decision within my career. And I would definitely advise students to do the same, to try to get as much experience abroad as possible. I think it has equipped me professionally. It has equipped me with the experience I need and the knowledge that I do have today to be able to operate as a professional chartered quantity surveyor. I've worked with reputable companies, CBRE, doing fund monitoring for clients such as Wells Fargo and HSBC, and traveling over to Malta to do project monitoring on data centers for their telecommunication companies. I mean, worked with Bouygues, which is, as I've mentioned earlier, top main contractor, doing luxury homes for billionaires, Russian millionaires and billionaires, on Kensington Palace Gardens, which is one of the most wealthiest streets in London. And, so the experience that I have gained through all of that is just phenomenal. And I also often question myself whether I've made the right decision to come home so soon.
We need you here too.
Well, the hurricane proved that, didn't it?
No, you have.
And as I've mentioned, I started working with the government 3 days before Hurricane Irma, so the timing couldn't have been any more perfect. But so to say, the experience transitioning, completely different. Work environment, well, especially coming from the private sector to public sector, completely different ball game.
How long did it take you to arrange that? You say 3 days before the hurricane, but from finishing and wanting to come back to actually get a job within government, did that take a time, or was that all pre-arranged? Or
It was pre-arranged. I was actually contacted by the government. I never applied for a job.
by the education department?
No, I was contacted directly by the deputy governor. And
Why did she contact you like that?
I
Did she know
think
you by family, or knew you were studying that particular?
I think she knows me by family, and at the time, what I was doing is a lot of marketing. So I was showcasing my projects. I'm in London. I'm on the 38th floor of a 450 million pound project. I'm working in Malta, and a lot of that was on social media, and I've developed a reputation for myself. And I suppose she came across it, and and she reached out.
So did she see the hurricane coming on the map, do you think?
It took quite a while. I think she reached out in April
That's excellent.
of that year, and so it took quite a while with
okay.
interviews and getting things arranged, and also myself trying to decide whether it's the best thing for me to do. And
Human Resource Office for the government falls under the
deputy governor.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a responsibility.
Took over
as
from
well.
the old chief secretary, I presume. And that's good.
So she reached out, and so it took a while to go through the process of interviews.
Excellent.
And that sort of
Did the same thing happen with you, Alexis?
I was in the BVI. At that point, when I decided or started thinking about coming home, I actually worked for Virgin on their, Mr. Branson's private island, Neck and Mosquito, as their emergency first responder and health and safety officer. And it was a good job, developed skills that I would say I didn't really have, but also gave me the opportunity to try and start something new there with the logistics of looking after staff members who there was lots of barriers to them accessing health when they worked on a private island, having to commute back over. Sort of like Parakeet to Providenciales, but the doctors are only on Provo, and the time lost traveling from Parakeet to Provo to see a doctor when you're on hourly wages, you don't want to leave work because that means your salary is cut. So it's a good opportunity to develop skills that I hadn't actually thought of or had to use when I was working in England, because it's all sort of free healthcare. Everyone has normal salaries or on salaries rather than hourly wages. But it wasn't working out for me in that I felt professionally I was going to lose to an extent in terms of being skilled as a general practitioner, because there wasn't enough going on. So I made a decision that even though it was a good opportunity in terms of branding and the name behind it, working for neck of mosquito, Mr. Branson, or Sir Branson, that.
Sir Richard Branson. Yes.
Sir Richard Branson. So I actually went back to the UK for a month to do some general practice so I can keep my license in England active, which I do every year for appraisals. And at that point started thinking, okay, am I going to stay in England? Which at that point I had a 9-month-old, so again the logistics of that, not having family members there and nursery, etc. Or do I come home? And so I reached out to all of the practices, including government sector and into health Canada, to find out what vacancies there were, whether as a locum for short term or a long-term vacancy. And there was just one available with Grace Bay Medical, so I started there. In terms of transitioning, it was tricky because I came when the season was not open as yet, so it was very quiet. And in England, I'm used to seeing a new patient or a new face every 10 minutes versus every half hour, but still the gaps between waiting for patients to come in. So granted, coming from the BVI, it was quiet. I felt it like I went from 6th gear into neutral without actually transitioning through the gears. And I struggled because I liked being a bit more.
It does surprise me a little bit that having government having spent quite at least 8 of your years in secondary education, and you developing a very strong professional qualification, that they wouldn't be rather like the Deputy Governor in Dominic's case.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be tracking you and counting the days for your return and having a position ready. I think that's one of the things we don't do well.
No, agreed.
And we need to actually improve on that, especially to actually target and follow somebody through
Agree.
their career. And actually, because both of you said, I was thinking about staying away, and what happens in the Caribbean commonly
Don't come
is all our trained personnel, 50% of them stay away. Nursing staff is very common in the Caribbean, medical doctors, and they develop a life elsewhere. It's a very different life, and we're very pleased that you've come back to us. And because and you can spread the message really, and help develop change in career advice, and just by example of being here, being senior members, top echelon of our community. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have to say that this is probably the longest conversation I've had with either of you. I'm certainly impressed by both of you in your own way, but I'm always impressed by young people who have a great sense of who they are and where they're going in life. And clearly, both of you exhibit that for me tonight, and the fact that you, through no pressure from anyone, you've made your way back home. And as Doc was saying, I think it's unfortunate that an area of in our region, not just the Turks and Caicos, but the wider Caribbean, that we suffer. We need so much in terms of our development, and we suffer so much from this brain drain, where we're educating people for the bigger world, and it should be the other way around. So I want to congratulate both of you for the decision that you've made to come back home and cast your buckets down and make life better for yourselves and for your future countrymen. It's admirable. Okay?
Thank you.
So we've had a conversation with Dr. Alexis Mizik and Dominic. It's been a great conversation. We hope we can do it another time. Maybe when we can get 2 or 3 more of your fellow professionals, young people who've made their way back home, and to make their contribution to our society. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.